ready to dive in?
I'm ready. How are you doing today?
I am good. We were talking a little bit before we started recording that I literally tried pumping for like 10 minutes before this call and nothing came out. So I was like, that's how today's going to go. And I'm really excited about that. So
Yeah, you got to get that hydration up.
I know. Well, it's really funny that that is like the litmus test for me now. It used to be like I would get to around 2 or 3 p.m. and I'd be like, oh, like I got a little bit of headache. I'm a little tired. I feel like I haven't drank enough water today. Now it's like, I tried pumping while Shay was at daycare and nothing's coming out. So I think I'm a little dehydrated today. It's like a very interesting change of events here.
Yeah. Are you like at all on like the Stanley gang? Okay. Yep. There you go.
Not a Stanley, still in the Yeti
Okay.
camp
Yeti
over here.
crew.
I'm in
I
the Yeti
have
crew.
both. I have both. I have a
What do you
client who works at Yeti, and then I got a Stanley on sale at Target. And so I'm like switch on and off, and I'm torn. I like both.
Well, I have to know what the difference is because it's so fascinating to me that there are like two opposing camps about water beverage like holders.
I have a hard time believing that when it comes to actual insulation, anybody can beat Yeti.
Yeah.
Like it just keeps everything really cold. I do think the lid straw combo of the Stanley is much more secure. It screws
Mm,
in instead of like popping on, and it's got like a little seal the straw goes through, so it's not just like floating in a hole. So like it is a little bit more contained.
okay.
So for
So
that
it's
like busy mom life, like I get it. And they just make all the nice pastel, like aesthetically pleasing colors.
I get that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally get that. Yeah, because I jerry rigged mine. I have like the, regular top and then I put a metal straw that I got on Amazon with I had to buy little silicone toppers for my metal straws because I was literally splitting my lip every time I went to go drink because I would just go in for too hard. And I would
Yeah.
split my lip every time on this metal straw.
Ugh, that's awful. I
I
have the
know.
little silicone stoppers too. But
Yeah.
speaking of mom life and hydration, how's everything going with Shay? Do you want to give us like a fill in on how old he is and like where you're at in your
Yeah.
postpartum journey?
Yeah. So he's amazing. He is like 6.5 months old now. He was born, technically he was born 2 weeks early, 2 or 3 weeks early, but I think my due date was not correct.
Mm,
So we don't really know if he was early or if he was right on time, but honestly, he was exactly when he was supposed to come. So it doesn't really matter. He was fine. Everything was great. I had the best birth experience I think that
awesome.
I could have had for my first time. I truthfully, it was not at all what I learned birth was going to be because it never is.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of things so we took a birth class, and there are a lot of things that you learn in birth class about what the average labor looks like, with different timed contractions, they progress. You should gradually feel them getting more and more intense, but you're always prepared for the next one. Wasn't really what happened with my labor. I went from like not being in labor to having double peak contractions, like kind of right
Oof.
off the bat. Yeah. And so I wasn't particularly prepared for that, but honestly, looking back on it, it felt like exactly what I needed for my first labor, my first birth experience, because it can only go up from here. And I know exactly now what I can do to kind of make it go a little bit smoother the next go around. And yeah, I mean, I gave birth at home. It was incredible. I walk into my bedroom every single day now, and I literally have like a flashback of giving birth at the foot of my bed. And
Oh, I love
an
that.
it was an incredible experience. And I could talk about that forever, but yeah, he's 6.5 months old now. Every single day he is growing and learning something new, and it is wild to see
Yeah.
them like make the connections in their head about like, when I do this, this happens. If I reach, someone will pick me up, you know?
Yeah.
If I hold on to this thing, I can pull myself up. So it's very, very cool to see him like learning all of these new things literally every day.
Oh, that's so fun. I can't wait to
Yeah.
get to that stage.
Speaking of, how are you
Yeah.
feeling, Miss Pregnant
So
Lady?
surprise. No. So yeah, I'm 11 weeks pregnant right now. I'm
Amazing.
like almost out of the first trimester,
You're
which
so close.
I'm excited for. But it's been good. I mean, I gotta say, like, I am pretty lucky so far with how well I've been feeling. The fatigue is out of this world, dude. Like, I'm tired.
Yeah.
And I could sleep 9 hours and then take 2 naps and still be like, I'm gonna go full gremlin mode on the couch today. Like, there's not a lot going on. So
Is it,
the fatigue's been pretty strong.
have you, how have you been navigating that? Because I know that that can be, especially as a fellow type A woman, like that can be really challenging to be so tired and not used to being able to kind of like push through that. How are you navigating that?
I will say I've had a couple moments of like major anxiety solely just due to feeling unproductive.
Yeah.
But like I also everything with us conceiving was very serendipitous with timing. Like I took a step back from the corporate world and like a stressful 9 to 5 job and doing that for 5 years, and moved into trying to start my own entrepreneurial endeavor and like really scaling back on hours. So still in the building phase of that where I can really control the timeline and how I want to roll it out. So it's really a blessing in disguise that like this happened only 2 months after I made that decision. So I've been able to manage my expectations really well. And like, this is the time you do get to rest and the time you need it. So take it like you have the opportunity to. But at the same time, I'm like, oh, the dishes aren't done. I haven't done laundry in 2 weeks. And like, I need to like talk to this lawyer and make this business plan. It's just not happening right now because all I want to do is watch The Great and like have a snack and take another nap.
Yeah. How
So
has,
it's dueling, but it's been okay.
yeah, have you had any food aversions?
Lots of food aversions, which is so funny for me because I love
Mhm.
everything. There's
Yeah.
not a food I don't like.
Yeah.
And like you and I both eat really well. Lots of protein. I mean, I easily eat 140 to 150 grams of protein a day.
Yeah.
So right now, I'm lucky if I sneak up to 100.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not a huge carbohydrate eater. I'm celiac, so I don't eat gluten. So other than like sweet potato, rice, throwing that like sprinkled in a salad and stuff, like I'm not heavy on the carbohydrates regardless. And the only thing that sounds good is like gluten-free toast and maybe some avocado on it.
Yeah. I think my first
Like,
trimester, like, I don't think, okay, full disclosure, I don't think I ate more than like a vegetable every 2 days throughout my
yeah,
entire pregnancy. Like first trimester, I don't think I had a vegetable at all. The thing, like Gabe laughed at me because the things that I subsisted on during my first trimester were gluten-free waffles and almond butter. That's like
ooh,
the only thing I could eat
yeah,
in the morning, especially. And so I would like force myself to have a protein shake throughout the day. I think
yeah.
I lived on protein shakes and then gluten-free waffles in my first trimester.
So
And
that was me this morning.
yeah,
Went to coach at 5:30 and I just had like my protein and water in a shaker bottle and I had 2 pieces of gluten-free toast with a big slab of like grass-fed butter on it. And I was like,
yeah,
all right, this is what we're working with right now.
yeah. I mean, truthfully, in your first trimester, especially, it's so tough because you're navigating this fatigue that's like, it literally feels like you're drowning at some points. And then
Yeah.
you just aren't hungry for anything. I think anytime Gabe would make eggs in my first trimester, I was like, you need to go cook that outside. I can't
Yep.
I can't be with you when you are making eggs. And so that was really tough, but
Want to know
it's
something funny?
yeah.
So my husband, I think, has sympathy egg aversion. We used to
Oh,
eat eggs every day, both of us. Like eggs is a staple in our diet. Like it
yeah.
has everything you
Us
need in it.
too.
It's like
Yeah.
a multivitamin basically. And every morning now he's like, I don't think I can have an egg either. I'm like, am I rubbing off on you? Or like my hormones that strong?
Instead of sympathy cravings, it's sympathy
It's sympathy
aversion.
aversions. Yeah.
Oh, that's so
Just
sweet though.
hysterical. I know.
Gabe did not do that.
Um, yeah. Well,
No.
it's funny too. I know we were chatting previously. You exercised every day during your first trimester.
I did, but I'm always really like hesitant to share that because I went to the gym every day. And then I went to our gym because Gabe also went to our gym and it's literally 400 meters from our house. So like
Right.
there wasn't a lot of barrier to me getting to the gym. What I did when I got there was like bare minimum. Some days I just went in and I did like some strict press and maybe some, we have a cable machine, so like maybe some lat pull downs, and then
Mhm.
I stretched and I hung out with him. Or some days I would just like sit on the bike. So like, yes, I worked out every day. Some days it was more movement, more volume than
Yeah.
other days. But truthfully, it was the one thing that really helped keep my nausea down in that first
Yeah.
trimester. And I didn't get really sick during my first trimester, so I never threw up, but I just always had that like kind of consistent level of nausea where nothing sounded good to eat. I was tired because I really wasn't eating very much. So the movement in the morning like really helped kind of keep that down a little bit.
Yeah, no, that totally makes sense. And I imagine as well, it's also mental, right? Like you and I both have very athletic backgrounds.
Yeah.
So even if it looks different once you get there, just having the routine of going to the gym and like having some intentional movement for
Yeah.
your body is like really helpful mentally.
Yeah, and I think that's honestly a place where a lot of women get stuck is if I go to the gym and it can't look like I can't follow my program,
Hmm.
then what's the point of going?
Yep.
So that was definitely a hurdle for me. I really did have to get over that in the first couple of weeks of my first trimester. And truthfully, like once I got over that hurdle, I did feel a lot more productive if I went. Even if I didn't
Hmm.
do very much when I got there, as long as I got into the gym, I felt like I accomplished something that day.
Yeah. When you finally kind of got into your second trimester, got more into a groove in the gym, did you follow a program or were you just kind of doing what felt right for that day?
I did follow a program. I felt like I needed to have something, just kind of like, bare bones outline of something to do. And I had been following Paragon. Have you heard of Paragon? The
Yeah, with
bodybuilding
LCK.
program. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I followed Paragon. I've been following, or I had been following Paragon for like 3 years at that point. So I just kept
Yeah.
going with what I was doing because I enjoyed it. It was um, easy to follow.
Hmm.
I had ways that I knew I could modify things if I needed to. It was nice to have something to do
Yeah.
that I wasn't thinking about it myself. So I continued to follow that program and I made a lot of adjustments.
Right.
Like I said, there were some days that I would do part A. There were some days that I would do half of part A. There were some days where I was like, I'm going to do this movement and this movement. And I think you know, that's good for today. I would kind of mix and match things that felt like I needed them. And then in my second trimester, I got energy back. I felt a lot better. I wasn't as nauseous and I was able to do a lot more of the program itself. I think I probably got through the majority of the program from my second trimester on until like the last few weeks of my pregnancy.
Okay, that's awesome. No, that's great to hear, and I think having that continuity is so great. Like in my situation, I had such an abrupt change in activity coming
Yeah.
from an Olympic weightlifting background. And like for those that don't know, like Olympic weightlifting, it's a competition-based style of strength training where you're solely focusing on two lifts, clean and jerk and snatch. They're very power focused, takes a lot of mobility. It's really nervous system heavy. And you're working in very low rep ranges at very heavy weights and using tools like belts and things like that. Not necessarily what you want to be doing when you have a bunch of relaxin setting into all of
Yeah.
your joints and your muscles. So it's
Yeah.
been a big shift
Yeah.
changing.
What are you changing to? What have you decided?
Yeah, so I'm doing birth fit. So
Awesome. I love that.
yeah, doing Lindsay Matthews and following Leah and doing all of that. So I'm really enjoying the mindfulness piece of that and just having movements where first trimester right now, like mobility is really at the forefront. Like everything's a box squat. Like I'm not
Hmm.
doing an ass-to-grass squat like I normally would because I want to be mindful of what's going on with the hormone changes. And I think that's really important. And I think there's a lot of misconceptions about exercise and pregnancy. I work in a gym and I pick up and set up equipment and weights all day long. And everyone's always looking at me like, why are you picking that up? Don't touch it.
Hmm.
Like that's
Yeah.
dangerous. I'm like, well, no, I mean, like relative to my strength, like it's not, and I'm going to be careful.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, I'm curious to see like what your experience was working in, fitness and nutrition, and like what people's reactions were to like how you were exercising.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've always been kind of like the black sheep of our family. I always do things
Hmm.
very differently than everyone in our family. And so I
Girl,
don't
same.
necessarily, yeah, I don't necessarily think it was like that surprising that I exercised all through my pregnancy. And at the same time, um, Gabe always shared with me that, from his family point of view, they're all from Ecuador. And like in Latin America, in Latin American culture, it's very common for pregnant women to not do anything.
Hmm.
And so when I would post, because I always share like content of my workouts and things like that. And when I would share them on Instagram, Gabe's family would be like, why is she doing that? Like, that's not safe. And same thing, like relative to my strength, this is okay, and I keep going back to, if you think about other cultures where, even indigenous cultures where women are really the primary gatherers of food, of, supplies, things like that, they do so with their babies. They do so when they're pregnant. And it's one of
Yep.
those things that really just shows you, if you are active pre-pregnancy, you continue to stay active, maybe it does change a little bit. It still is safe, and it's actually really important to continue to stay active throughout your pregnancy because it helps with all hormone regulation, but also your recovery postpartum. And so I think for me, a big thing, like you mentioned, was just being aware and being mindful of the movement that I was doing so that I wasn't, not trying to PR during this time, not trying
Right.
to break any records, not trying to get stronger during pregnancy, but I was still mindful of maintaining. And that's
Hmm.
something I think that we, as a community, a culture, we get kind of backwards. We underestimate how much effort it takes to build muscle, but we overestimate how much it takes to maintain that once we do
A
build it.
hundred percent, a hundred
Yeah.
percent. And I also think, it's really interesting. In my undergrad, I did a transfer. So I actually started my education at the University of Utah, and their exercise sports science program at the time worked with their level 1 trauma center, looking at college age students and then elderly, and what would happen if they were admitted and bedridden for over a
Mm,
week, and how much muscle mass would they lose.
mm-hmm.
And it was almost the same between the elderly and the group of, 19 to 22-year-olds, just being stagnant, laying down, not having any motion in your skeletal muscle. It is shocking how quickly you lose muscle mass.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we also know how little effort it takes in exercise to maintain the muscle mass that you've already built.
Yeah.
So I think it is really important for people to understand that, like, absolutely stopping all activity that you previously were doing may actually be more of a detriment than it is helping you.
Yeah. And I think, of course, it goes without saying there are always going to be special populations that,
Of course.
may need some form of, pulling back on their movement. However, there are like countless studies that show that um, bed rest during pregnancy is detrimental regardless of what the issue is. There's
Yeah.
always going to be the need for some form of movement, whether it's literally just walking every day or it is getting into the gym and doing a weightlifting program of some sort throughout your pregnancy.
Yeah, I mean, just this morning, it's funny. I met a woman here who is only a week and a half ahead of me. She's like turning 13 weeks on Sunday.
I love
And so
that.
we went for a walk with the dogs this morning, and both of us are just like, yeah, honestly, 95% of our workouts first trimester right now are just walking.
Yeah.
It's
And
just getting
that's,
out and moving, and that's okay.
yeah, that's actually great because if you think about all of these changes in the first trimester, there's so much relaxing going through, right? Like going through your body. There are so many different pieces of your skeletal muscle and your skeleton that are actually changing. There are like ligaments that
Oh
are
yeah.
stretching. All of
The
these different
pull
things
you
are
get with
moving.
the anterior pelvic tilt, your center of
Yeah.
gravity is changing. I mean, there's so many changes happening that
Yes.
having that low impact, steady state motion to kind of just like reconnect and say, okay, like, how is my body changing? Where is it going? Focusing on nasal breathing, doing all of that is super beneficial.
Yeah, and it helps to let your body do what it's going to do on its own. Where if you force some form of weightlifting in that first trimester, especially in the early second trimester, it almost does more harm than good, right? Because now you're putting more strain on those ligaments, on those muscles that kind of like, they need their own space to settle and get to where they
Yeah,
need to get to.
100%. And it's funny, actually, a fellow nutritional therapy practitioner who I connected with years ago, her favorite thing to say is, "What would your ancestors do?"
I love that.
And I love that question whenever you're like, okay, like I'm on the fence about this, or I'm thinking about incorporating this food, or I'm thinking about incorporating this style of movement. But I'm on the fence. It's like, okay, what would your ancestors do?
Mm,
And in all reality, that's going to give you a pretty clear answer almost every time. They're picking up their supplies, they're carrying it on their back. It's usually off center load. It's not a perfect barbell, right? Like
hmm
it's functional movement, climbing up hillsides, bending over, picking things up, having your babies with you, being on your feet, walking for majority of the day. And I think, whether you're someone who's trying to conceive, pregnant, postpartum, or just a regular person. I mean, we live such sedentary lives. Like it's so important to remind ourselves of that
Yeah.
and to add in like little pieces of movement throughout our day. Because I think something we've gotten really attached to in modern society, especially in the fitness community, is like how efficient can you be in a 1 hour
hmm
workout? Like how hard can you go in like a 45-minute to 1 hour workout where it's super effective? But then the rest of the day you sit at a desk or you sit on your ass.
Yeah.
And it's like, is that really more beneficial? I don't think so.
No, I think there's man, I should actually see if I can pull some up, but there are some studies that show that if you are less efficient in that workout that you do throughout the day and you are more active the rest of the day, it's going to be more beneficial long term for your health and for your body composition and
Yeah.
for everything, than that 1 hour really hard workout that you do. But if you sit the rest of the day, there's
Right.
plenty of research and anecdotal evidence, just from clients that even I've worked with that show that is 100% the case that if we give our bodies more time, not even in intense movement, but just more time in light movement throughout the day, we're going to feel better energy wise. We're going to utilize the fuel that we take in better. So we'll have better body composition. There are all sorts of things that improve when we continue to move throughout the day instead
Yeah.
of, hitting it really hard for an hour and then
Yeah.
just sitting the rest of the time.
100%. And I think too, like this big resurgence and focus on like step count is like a
Yeah.
part of that movement and like a part of
Yeah.
that information coming out. And I'm always someone that's like, understand the why.
Yeah.
Like, okay, like people are promoting intermittent fasting. Why? Like, why are you doing intermittent fasting? Or I drink non-dairy milks. Why? Are you lactose intolerant? Or are you just seeing all over the internet that that's supposed to be
Healthier.
healthier for your, right? Are you getting in 10,000 steps because everyone told you that's the arbitrary number you should be hitting? Or are you doing it because you want to be able to take a walk after every meal so that your insulin doesn't spike as high and you can better absorb the glucose from your meal and a less and like a more manageable, like lower rate,
Yeah.
right? Like, is that why you want to increase your step count, right? So it's like understanding the why is just so important to me, and especially when helping clients get motivated to like bring on a new habit. um and I think too, like especially for pregnant women, postpartum women, like your hormones are doing all kinds of crazy things. Like your insulin becomes less and less efficient and more resistant as you go through your trimesters. Getting in those walks and those steps after you eat can be such a huge benefit.
Yeah. And I think going back to the whole concept of understanding the why, it feels a lot easier to implement if you know why you should be
Yeah.
doing it. Like just saying to a pregnant woman who's already exhausted, like, hey, you should go for a walk after your meals. Yeah, sure. Like they
Yeah.
may do it, they may not do it. It depends on the person. But if they know okay, I'm doing this because I know that it will make me feel better in the long run. I know that I will feel better after I go for this walk. It makes it a lot easier to start the process and to get the momentum going on that habit. It just makes it really, really difficult if you don't know why. And there are so many women that I know and that I have kind of come in contact with since um, being pregnant, since having Shay, that are just like, I just don't want to know. It's like, it makes me too anxious to know, like
Mm,
what's going on. And part of me is like, yeah, I get that, because then you kind of have, a specific expectation of what it should look like. And if it doesn't look like that, that can be kind of, scary.
yeah.
And at the same time, if you know what's normal or what's average or what has happened for other women in the past, kind of generally speaking, why these things are important to do, I just feel like it empowers you to make a better choice for your own body and your own baby in the long run, right? Like
100%.
that to me, I feel like if I don't think I could go through any process without knowing as much as I could about it.
Yeah.
I read, I think, so many books during pregnancy about birth. I just wanted to know every type of birth. I read about hospital births. I read about home births, birth center births. I read about free births, like where no one is there to attend to your baby. Like
Mhm.
I read everything, and it was just really to know the why behind recommendations that were given. Like, why are women recommended to not do anything during pregnancy? It actually
Yeah.
doesn't, there's not a lot of evidence that shows that that's helpful.
Right. 100%. And it's interesting. For anybody that's listening and they're like looking for great, quick resources, whether it's just following people on Instagram versus like actually diving into a whole book. Dr. Nathan Riley, OBGYN, great follow. He just created a brand new course with Sarah Rosser, who's a midwife on Ina May's
Mm-hmm.
farm. And something they both talk about really early on is what they're titling radical responsibility.
I love that.
And understanding that when you make a choice and you make an informed choice where you understand all the options inside and out and you're choosing the one that feels the best for you, sometimes shit happens and that still may not end up the way you planned it.
Right.
And that's okay. But at that point, then there's no pointing fingers. And I
Right.
think that is what's really scary about this whole process for so many women.
Yeah.
There's already so many things and changes happening to your body before you get to meet this child. And it's like this weird construct of like, I know there's a baby in there, but like my body has a mind of its own all of a sudden.
Mm-hmm.
Where like you used to feel kind of in sync. If I do this workout, if I eat this food, like I know that makes me feel crappy, that makes me feel better. And like that kind of almost goes out the window a little bit when you're
Mm-hmm.
pregnant, and you start to really lose that connection of feeling like your skin suit is yours.
Yeah.
Like it's doing its own thing. So
Right.
that's anxiety invoking, because that you're losing that control and surrendering to that loss of control. And then realizing too, like even when you make these really informed, empowered decisions, there are things that happen in this world that are completely out of everybody's control, even if you do everything perfect.
Right.
And that's really anxiety inducing, and I think
For sure.
that's a hard mindset shift that a lot of women, one, it doesn't even get brought up to be talked about, but that nobody talks about.
Yeah.
And that's scary.
Yeah. And I'm curious for you, because I have my own thoughts on this, but I'm curious to know, like, how have you managed that shift from, like, everything that your body's doing to now you're like, this is a whole new uncharted territory for me.
Yeah, I would say I'm lucky in the fact that I've been obsessed with birth for a few years. So I'm not the mom that's like diving into all the information now that I'm
Mm.
pregnant. And granted, I'm diving in much more heavily than I ever have in the past, but I've always been like, I read Ina May's Guide to Childbirth 3 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah. So, and I loved it. And
Yeah.
part of the reason was my mom had a really traumatic birth with me.
Mm.
And hearing stories about that made me super fearful of birth.
Mm.
And then something came across my Instagram probably 4 years ago of someone who had a home birth, and I never even knew that that was an option.
Yeah.
And I was like, holy shit, that's fucking awesome. And it would look so calm. It's not what's in the movies of like emergency, slice her open, like get this baby into
No
it was just
screaming.
no screaming. It was just beautiful and
Yeah.
calm. But oh my God, it also like simultaneously while I was watching it, like flood all this fear over me because I had never seen anything like it. And I was like, it
Mm.
can look like that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I kind of just started diving down this rabbit hole out of my own curiosity because I already had anxiety about it before I was even in a place where I was ready to have kids.
So interesting. I did not think about home birth. I didn't know it was a possibility until basically I got pregnant. I
Mm.
miscarried in January before
Oh,
getting pregnant in March. So
okay.
with that first pregnancy, I started to think about it. We
Yeah.
found a midwife, we found a birth center that would do a home birth. But prior to getting pregnant, I did not even think a home birth was a thing. Like I didn't know that
Mhm.
until literally last year.
Yeah.
And once I and I truthfully didn't this is a problem. I don't do research on things until I'm like, yes, I want to know more about this. And I
Yeah.
didn't want to know more about birth until I was pregnant. Like I
And
didn't
you
even
know
think
what?
about it.
You and 99% of the rest of the world, dude.
Right. Exactly. Like that's why I think it's very helpful to share that because I think um, I had a very traditional experience of being pregnant and being like, oh, I should probably learn about this now.
Mhm.
And I think that's what a lot of women do. And I will say, I also went to the extreme and I read everything
Mhm.
in this first pregnancy that was
Yeah.
like things that, you've probably read over 3 or 4 years. Um, so yeah, same thing though. Like I didn't know home birth was an option literally
Yeah.
until I was like, hold up. I don't
Mhm.
want to give birth in a hospital. Hospitals give
Yeah.
me the heebie-jeebies. Like I
Totally.
don't feel
I'm the
calm
same.
walking into a hospital. Even the hospital here, like don't get me wrong, is beautiful. It's brand new. It's like a beautiful facility. Everybody's super nice. I don't like hospitals. So for
Yeah.
me that was like why am I going to consider giving birth in a space where I don't feel safe or calm?
Right.
There are a
Correct.
lot of women that would not feel safe or calm giving birth in their home,
Yeah.
and that's okay too. Like
Totally.
I think that it's worth discussing the fact that just because we may be going down that route doesn't mean that that's for everyone. And I love that you brought up Nathan and Sarah and their concept of radical responsibility because it really is about you making the informed choice for your birth experience.
Yes. a
Like it
hundred
doesn't
percent.
matter where it is as long as you feel good and sound and safe
Yeah.
in that decision.
Yeah. And I think too, like a lot of the hesitancy or the judgment that I'm just for lack of a better term, because there's like a mainstream mom might feel when like a home birth mom is talking about home birth, right? Like it's like that crunchy verse
Yeah.
mainstream community kind of
Yeah.
tug of war is there's all kinds of spectrums of people and how they share information in every group that walks the earth, right? But I find that majority of the time, the thing that fires up like the crunchy or home birth mom community is the fact that a lot of these moms have no idea what all of their options are because they're only
Right.
being told one option. And that option could still absolutely be the best option for them. And there are some moms who choose to home birth and something comes up and they need to transport to the hospital and they need that intervention anyway. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
think we're all glad these medical interventions exist,
Right.
but there's a lack of sharing of statistics and what the outcomes actually look like and
Yeah.
giving moms the opportunity to make the decision for themselves.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of scenario that I find fires up the most people, you know.
Yeah. And I truthfully do think though that there's a lack of education around what the purpose of birth in a hospital is for.
Yeah.
Um, And truthfully, you know, like if you really think about what a trained OBGYN is like, what their specialty is surgery.
Correct.
They're trained surgeons. And
Yeah,
so,
majority of that fellowship and residency is spent in the OR.
yeah,
And with an OBGYN who maybe doesn't just focus in a labor delivery unit, a lot of that's also being focused on procedures like hysterectomies, removing fibroids, so all kinds of different women's health related procedures.
right,
But it's very surgery focused.
right.
And you see things in certain documentaries where I believe it. If you look up the hospitals in our country that have the highest C-section rates, and you walk into the labor and delivery floor and you ask the OBs, like, hey, like, how many completely natural, unmedicated head first births have you seen? The number would probably shock you how surprisingly low
It would be
it
very
is.
low.
Yeah. And so that's something to keep in mind if you're someone who feels comfortable in exploring other options with trained professionals. Free birth is not for everybody. It's not for me,
No,
and that's okay.
I
I
mean, maybe
want
it's for me.
some,
I don't know, but
yeah, you're like,
well,
maybe on the next one.
well, I don't know. We want to have like 4 kids. So maybe like by the fourth time, I'll be like,
You're
you know
like, I
what?
got
I
this.
got this. I'll go do
Yeah.
it myself.
Yeah.
Nobody has to come see me. I'm good. We'll
Yeah.
see.
And I know for like
I'm
my
kidding.
husband and I, like the first one, we're like, we know our goal is home birth and
Yeah.
anything could happen. And that's
Yeah.
our goal. But we also know that this is our first time doing this and anything could happen. So we want someone there and a team there that we
Yes.
feel really supported by, and we feel like they know their shit and they've had the reps under them because it's the first time.
Well, that's the
And we
thing.
want
Like,
that reassurance.
yeah. And that's the thing. I mean, I had a full stack team here for
Yeah.
our first birth. I had a doula, I had a student doula, I had a midwife, a student midwife, and an assistant midwife,
Yeah.
apprentice midwife. So I had 5 women here and Gabe.
That's
And
awesome.
it was incredible because it didn't feel like a crowded space. I have video of the actual, like, our birth of our baby, and it was silent. The room was so quiet. And it was dark in here. It was like such a beautiful experience. But if you really think about everything that's going on behind the scenes, I had, a doula with me to help me through my labor, which, like I mentioned earlier, was very non-traditional because he was OP, occipital posterior. So he was kind of like halfway sunny side up at that point. So he was putting a lot of pressure on my back. So I had a really bad back labor from the beginning. So I had double peak contractions because of his position from the beginning. My body was really trying to turn him around prior to giving birth to him. And he did turn by the time I was ready to like push. But having the support there of a doula to, like, help with back massage, give me hip compressions,
Yeah.
just literally to tell me like, you're okay. You just he's in a weird position, like to suggest other positions to be in, to labor in, like having someone on your team that's strictly there for that purpose to kind of help guide you was invaluable. And then having, the midwife team who is trained and specializes in home birth was incredible because even like, no matter the fact that every birth is different, they've seen enough births combined to know what is normal and then what, would need special attention, what maybe would require a transfer if necessary. Like they're
Yeah.
trained to know what the signs are for you to need to go somewhere if you needed to.
Yeah.
I think that's a big misconception, is that people think of home birth and they think, well, what if you don't get to the hospital in time? Midwives know before
Way before.
it gets to that last resort point that you need to go. There are signs way, way, way before that point even comes to. So I think that's just important to know, that even if you're, not super confident in a decision to go with a birth center or a home birth versus a hospital, if you have any inkling in trying it or knowing more about it, it's worth discussing it with
Yeah.
a midwife, at least going to talk to a midwife. or at
Yeah,
least
and I
having a
think
doula.
100%, and that's kind of the way our setup is falling into place. The midwife that we found, who we adore, has a student midwife under her right now. She has had multiple apprentices, and then our doula, shout out to Embo. uh,
Hello.
she has doulas in training constantly, so we'll see
Mhm.
if she has one at the time, our little one decides to arrive. But there's going to definitely be a stacked team available of
Yeah.
very, very competent, knowledgeable women.
Yeah.
And me and JPV feel very reassured by that.
I love
And
that.
this is a whole nother episode, but just as a side note for those who are like not exposed to this information at all, midwives are still medical professionals.
Yes.
They just practice in a different setting. And they are experts in natural vaginal delivery. They still come with oxygen, Pitocin for bleeding. Like
They
they
come
come
with all
prepared.
medical
They
supplies. Yeah.
can do all your blood work for you throughout your process. And so I think that's something that's really not understood. And granted, there's two kinds, CPM, CNM. That's a whole nother conversation for
Right.
later, and kind of the differences between them.
Yeah.
They, just like an OBGYN, they have like a certified body that they have to keep their credentials up to. They go through multiple years of training. So going that route doesn't mean that you don't have modern medical knowledge behind you if something needed to be intervened upon.
Right. And it is also worth mentioning that, depending on your state, there are different regulatory like laws about midwifery practices. So we happen to live in a state where midwifery is fairly popular, and working with the midwife is not a challenging option, but there are some states where it is, unfortunately. But it is always worth doing the research and always worth looking at it if it sounds like an option that would be even remotely for you.
Yeah, 100%. I think we should like segue a little bit. I want to talk more about food.
Let's do it. I love it.
So I actually have my sister-in-law and her fiance coming into town tomorrow.
Oh, love
and we are going to sushi. And I know we were talking about this the other week. And just some of those common misconceptions around food and pregnancies. Well, oh my God, she's pregnant. She's going to go to sushi. Oh yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I didn't mention this when we were talking about our like first trimester foods earlier, but I also like strictly lived off of sushi for like my first, actually, I think throughout my pregnancy, that was like the one thing that I wanted was salmon sashimi. And I ate so much of it during my pregnancy. But the reason is because I did a ton of research on, where the recommendation to avoid it comes from.
Yep.
And really a lot of the recommendations to avoid foods during pregnancy come from the potential risks of bacterial infections or parasitic or kind of like viral infection, because your immune system is at a heightened state because you are now, not only protecting yourself, you're growing a human, so there's more stress on your body. Taking that into account, it's a lot harder necessarily to recover from any sort of infection.
The last thing any pregnant lady wants is food poisoning.
Right.
So I'm with you though. When I learned the reasoning behind a lot of the food recommendations, a lot of it's just out of, we want to reduce your risk for getting sick.
Yeah.
And in some cases, we want to reduce your risk for heavy metal exposure.
Especially in sushi and in fish in general, fish consumption.
Right. Yeah. And so understanding which fish have higher quantities of mercury and heavy metals and which fish do not is also really valuable. So kind of going back to that, like, I don't want to know. It's like, well, if you did know, probably enjoy some salmon sashimi all you want.
Right. There's less of a concern there.
Yeah.
Same thing goes for, well, I think we should talk about that. So when we look at the exposure levels of mercury, other heavy metals in fish, which ones are the lowest?
I mean, the lowest are going to be mostly like your freshwater feeders and your small fish that live off of other plant-based items like algae, other little bugs. The larger the fish you have that eats other kinds of fish, especially in an ocean setting, the more opportunity for them to have a mercury or heavy metal buildup. So
Yeah.
things like shark, swordfish, even borderline tuna, things you want to be mindful of. Very, very large fish like the shark and swordfish, you're going to want to avoid completely. But tuna, you know, if you look at the research and you're sourcing it from a good quality, like wild caught in a good area, I mean, up to 4 ounces a week, and you're probably fine as well.
Right.
And
Yeah.
how it's prepared also needs to be taken into account. When we cook fish, a lot of the selenium that's in fish ends up getting burnt off. And selenium's a really powerful antioxidant, kind of like glutathione, where it really helps our liver detoxification process. So selenium specifically actually helps our liver push out a lot of heavy metals and more efficiently get rid of it, so it's not sitting stagnant in our body. So it kind of makes you think like, well, if I'm cooking my salmon versus having like, you know, a wild caught fresh, not like gas station sushi, obviously, because that's been sitting in the heat, right? We want to avoid what we can control, but good quality like salmon sashimi, it's going to have a much higher selenium content than your cooked salmon.
Yeah.
And you got to weigh out those pros and cons.
I'm also curious to know, and I don't know how we would necessarily do this, but I am curious to know if, like, depending on where you are in the country, that also plays a role, right? Because same reason that gas station sushi maybe isn't the best bet. Like, if you're in the desert, not close to a body of water, maybe sushi isn't your best option either, because it has to travel fairly far to get to you. So I'm curious. I don't know that answer, but I would be curious to know, like, if anybody has research on that, if we can find it. I think that also is something to, you know, to think about.
Yeah, I'd be curious to see, like, a lot of sushi's flash frozen, and that's how they prepare it. And there doesn't seem to be a lot of safety concern with flash frozen fish, but then again, how long is it staying frozen for before they defrost and prepare it to be served? And then how long is it sitting out defrosted before before it gets served to you? So all of those things play a role in you making an informed decision on whether or not you want to eat sushi. But when it comes to just looking at a nutritional standpoint in fish in general, regardless of the fish and how you prepare it and how you want to consume it, it is interesting to look at the research of populations that do live on water, who eat a lot of fish, and how much better their pregnancy outcomes are than we are in the US. Japan specifically is where they've done a lot of this research. And women eat a very high fish focused diet.
Raw fish, cooked fish, seaweed, like a lot of marine food sources.
And part of that is DHA, we all know, is so important, right? Like, we're all encouraged to have our fish oil supplements when we're pregnant, preferably from the actual animal source, so we're getting that high quality DHA. And if you're looking for supplements, make sure it's cold pressed. But we don't want any denatured oils in our supplements. But that's so important for neural tube development, especially early on, brain development. And our needs go up as well. I mean, we already have such a sway in omega-3 to omega-6 ratio in the American diet as it is. I mean, a lot of women could benefit even not pregnant by having an DHA or omega-3 supplement. So it's really important to make sure that that's included in your diet. And supplements, they're not absorbed the same as food. I mean, I'm so glad we have them. I take a ton of supplements. I'm a supplement nerd, but it's still not the same as getting it from your food. And so it's not a replacement.
Especially with an omega-3 supplement, because there's so much variety in the quality of those kinds of supplements. Like, we just named 4 different parameters for supplementation. You know, it can be kind of difficult to get it, but if you can focus on getting, you know, 3 to 4 servings of a high quality fish a week, that could, you know, that only helps boost your omega-3 levels. through a bioavailable source of those nutrients.
Yeah, absolutely. And among other things, I mean, you look at seaweed and just the amount of iodine that's in it. So snacking on some seaweed can be beneficial for you to get bioavailable iodine.
Yeah.
And for those that like really want to nerd out and dive into it, Lily Nichols, get her book, Real Food for Pregnancy.
Yes. Oh, that reminds me. What other books? Because we talked about Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. We talked about Nathan Riley and looking him up. He also has a podcast called The Holistic OBGYN. It is a fantastic resource. We just mentioned Real Food for Pregnancy, one of Lily Nichols' books on pregnancy nourishment for mama. What other books? What other resources do we got?
The other one that I want to mention, which I think is important for every American woman to keep on their radar, is also Lily Nichols' book for gestational diabetes.
Yes, agreed.
You know, obviously that may not be something you run into until later on. And her Real Food for Pregnancy book touches on insulin and blood glucose and ways to prevent it.
Yeah.
But I do think it's a really important tool to understand that you have lifestyle options to help manage that if you find yourself in that situation.
100%.
So I would recommend that. If you want to get into the philosophy of childbirth, anything by Michelle O'Donnell is great.
Yes. Yes, agreed.
And then I'm really enjoying The Big Letdown right now, which I'm forgetting the name of the author off the top of my head.
Let's see if I can get it.
But it is all about breastfeeding and lactation and the formula industry and just understanding things from a scientific and nutrient view.
Yeah.
And additionally from a follow the dollar commercial industry view.
I love a good conspiracy.
Yeah, exactly.
This is not really a conspiracy, but I do love a good.
But if you ever put on a tinfoil hat,
if you ever want to,
yeah,
come join me. It's the author is Kimberly Seals Allers. And it's called The Big Letdown: How Medicine, Big Business, and Feminism Undermine Breastfeeding. And I am so here for that. That's next on my list to read. I would also add The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding for anyone that is interested. It has a ton of resources specifically on breastfeeding and not just, you know, telling you that breast is best or anything like that. There's a lot of like really kind of functional tips on ways to get through those kind of first few weeks, months of breastfeeding, because take it from experience, it's wild. It is such a change in every kind of habit that you could think of, from sleeping to what you do during the day to like how you plan your day. There's so many things that go into just planning to breastfeed, and there are so many things that you run into where you're like, is this normal? Should I be feeling this? Should this hurt? You know, like, how do we navigate those things? And so there's a ton of resources in that book too, The Womanly Art of Breastfeeding.
What other books do you have?
Ooh, let me look. Not a baby book, but it is a parenting book called Hunt, Gather, Parent.
Ooh, yes.
I have been raving about this book. I read it in my first trimester. I'm going to have to reread it because that was very long ago, but it's all about how indigenous cultures, there's 3 specifically that she talks about in the book, but how indigenous cultures raise kids that are helpful and productive members of the family and society. It's like how to raise, it's called a camarito, and it's, you know, kids that want to be part of the family in the sense of they want to help clean, they want to help cook, they want to help do laundry. It's a way to raise your kids to be, you know, full forged members of your family, instead of feeling like you have to do things for them in order to be able to do all these other things.
I love that. One of my favorite quotes from Jordan Peterson is, don't do for your kids what they can do themselves.
Yes. And that's like basically exactly what it's about. So Hunt, Gather, Parent is by Micheline Duclef. I might have butchered that, but also a great book. I will link all of these in the show notes just so that you have them. And then another book is, okay, I have two. Nourishing Traditions.
Yes.
It was a little, I'm not going to lie to you, I am pretty far onto the like woo-woo side, the crunchier side of parenting, motherhood. I will not say that I'm not.
You don't need to.
It was a little farther on that side than even I am like into.
Okay.
Like,
so for the really granola moms who are looking to like do the full homestead, no EMFs, off the grid kind of mindset.
Yeah.
This is a good one for you.
Yeah. And like we have a homestead, like don't get me wrong. I'm pretty far on that side, but it's even like farther than me on that side. So it's there. I did read a lot of it and I took a lot of pieces from it, but there are still things that I was like, I don't know about that. Like I would like to see some research, I still want some research. But then the other one that I found really helpful was Mama Natural, and it is a week by week pregnancy guide that talks all about different changes, and it's kind of ways to make really just to like inform yourself on ways to be a little bit more natural with your pregnancy and postpartum.
I love that.
So
I was just great. Looking over at my stack of books here, the last one I want to mention before we wrap things up is if you're a gal who's listening, who's not yet pregnant or not yet had kids, but it's something that you're really curious about and you're really trying to get in touch with your hormones and optimize your health and your metabolism, The Woman Code by Elisa Vitti is like one of my favorite books I've ever read.
Yes, I love that one too. Okay, so we've got, I'm just gonna get the list going again. So Big Letdown, Hunt Gather Parent, Nourishing Traditions, Ina May's Guide to Childbirth, Woman Code,
Elisa Vitti, The Gestational Diabetes and Real Food for Pregnancy, The Big Letdown. Did we say that?
Yep.
And you Hunt Gather Parent.
I got that one. Nourishing Traditions, Mama Natural's Guide. Okay. I think that if you need more books than this, we got to talk because this is a really, really good starting place. So we'll link all of those for you. You can get them on Kindle. You can get them on as, real books. We don't care how you read it, but we highly recommend you read them. Anything else? Any other things that you want to share before we wrap up for today?
No, I think that covers it for today, and I'm excited to keep some more in store for the next one.
Me too. Well, thank you so much. This has been so fun to chat through all of this experience of pregnancy, postpartum.
Been a blast.
Yeah. We will kind of continue this conversation, but then more around health, nutrition, fitness, biohacking, all of the good stuff as we go. So thank you for being here.
Yeah, thanks guys for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.